Hello everyone, I'm back with an update on the plugin I've been featuring, which is attempting to get a KSP Interstellar-like setup compatible with system heat. So a KSP Interstellar-like setup is a separate reactor, generator, and nozzle that we have here, and system heat manages the radiators. So radiators are very important because we generate a lot of heat with the reactor and to some extent with the generator, but that in this system is going to be bundled with the reactor heat. And so we have this separate situation instead of all three things being combined or two things being combined, which is what happens with these far future engines where everything is sort of just one piece and not necessarily separate. But we can then have a greater diversity of engines and them looking quite different by mixing and matching the parts as necessary and as might be more efficient. For instance, it's not actually necessary to have this at a large scale right now, and that's because this is a very small reactor in general, and it doesn't produce much thrust, 0.3 kilonewtons. So it doesn't really matter what we scale this to, unless we scale it really small. Well, if we scale this a little bit larger, then here it's 0.5, but then we can scale it up and get a little bit more because that genuinely was too small for this reactor here. But this thrust is dynamic. In other words, it's being affected by what not only what the scale of this reactor is, but also the reactor throttle and also whether the generator is on. But that won't show in the SPH or VAB. So it'll only show in flight. Here it's just reading as if it was taking the full output of this reactor. It is dynamic, and that caused a problem for Pekka's warp thrust mod, and actually also for Solver engine, which works with real fuels. So I've had to fork Pekka's warp thrust mod into a custom one for this kind of engine. They can still work together. It's just that this particular nozzle and the nozzles that I'll be making will use this special ISH time warp that will handle the thrust during time warp, whereas Pekka's warp thrust mod will handle the thrust during time warp for all other parts. And that's so that they are still compatible with Solver engines. It's not a problem for this not being compatible with Solver engine. That's fine, because this has its own engine module. So yeah, and that's just part of the problem. So we can't use warp thrust with this, and we couldn't make warp thrust compatible with this because of the way it's being calculated. So it's got its own thing going. But it works, and we'll take a look at it outside to show that. It's interesting. We can increase the size of this, the tweak scale works, and it'll increase the thrust of this. And at a certain point, if we scale this up enough, we might actually have to scale the nozzle up again. Well, now it's 15. Oh, there we go, 18.4. So at this scale, it can't deal with all the thrust that would be coming out of here. You need a little bit bigger of a nozzle. So anyway, and of course you might want to scale up the generator, but when it comes to something that is outputting 96 megawatts, and the generator can take up to 38 megawatts, it looks like. So around that much is about how big it needs to be. Well, then that gets to be very heavy. So this bit, see, it's only 5.5 tons there. It is more than 250 tons. So more than 280 tons. So yeah, and that's to, if you were trying to get 10, well, I guess it's 10.8 now because of the generator, but if we shut down the generator, it'll be 18.6 again. So yeah, just to get a very tiny amount. So you might be wondering, wait a minute. We're talking about 200 tons, but Nerva was only like 10 tons and it got 300 kilonewtons. Why is this? Well, this is not that kind of reactor. This is a reactor that's meant to last for 5 years. In fact, one other feature that I've added here is that you can right click on the reactor and it'll tell you how long it lasts, 4.2 years. And that's based on how much enriched uranium it's got built in. And scaling up won't change that because it's scaling up the output at the same rate it's scaling up the amount of enriched uranium. So that's not like the NERVAs. The NERVA reactor is meant to output a whole lot more thermal energy quickly. And basically, it's gonna be doing that for a short period of time, like within an hour. It's not gonna use up all of its nuclear fuel in an hour, but it's trying to use as much of its nuclear fuel quickly as possible and generating gigawatts off a much smaller scale. So it's more like, maybe a little bit larger than this scale, something like that. And it doesn't try to generate power. It's not a bimodal reactor. So it's a smaller reactor, maybe even smaller than this. And instead of generating 5 megawatts, it's generating something like 2 gigawatts. But that's because it doesn't last very long. So that's why there's that difference. And it's so much heavier to generate the large amount of power because it's generating it for a long period of time. So that means that I will make a different reactor for the NERVA kind of setup and a different reactor for other kinds of setups. So that's why we're going to end up with a whole bunch of different reactors, and then there'll be different shaped generators for different purposes. If one that's more flat with the modules that are arrayed sort of circular, like around the central core, and there are other ways to rearrange that business. And then there's also magnetic nozzles. But anyway, let's just see that everything is working out right, and we'll have it be larger than before, so we'll need more radiator. But one thing we can do is just throttle down the reactor too, right? So we can see here we have we have enough removed here, so we can probably, even without the thermal nozzle doing its thing, manage something around 50% thrust with these radiators. As long as, but yeah, actually with the generator running, we can probably tune it up even more. Well, it looks like you can handle it. It'll go red otherwise. Okay, so that's all right. This is not generating much, 0.6 kilonewtons, but let's take it outside. Okay, here we are. The radiators are glowing red, showing that we are pushing them to the limit. And we would be in trouble if the generator was not doing its thing and effectively converting some of that energy into electricity, because then all of the heat energy would be absorbed. I'm trying to find system heat in here. There it is. So yeah, if we toggle the generator, we'd be generating 5 megawatts and it would go hotter. So we don't want that. It's having a little bit of trouble there. So let's use the engine here. And as we throttle up, you can see that the generated heat is diminished, but not completely eliminated, because this is spewing some of it out. And we do have the waterfall effect now. And it's 0.6 kilonewtons, as you see, 16-hour burn time. So obviously we would want the warp thrust to be working. And in this case, it's ISH time warp, is what I've ended up calling it. ISH, I mean, interstellar system heat is not the best name for things, but that's what it is. It was meant to be making KSP Interstellar compatible with system heat is the idea. So anyway, we can, in theory, time warp. Now, let's see that is truly working. So we see the apoapsis changing. You see the stage time changing, and here MechJeb can show the stage time properly in flight. In the SPH and VAB it cannot. It'll base that off of whatever number is in the configuration file. So as we time warp, we can see that it does do its thing, and we can still make use of the functionality that Pekka had in warp thrust. It's just that this has to operate differently. So that can proceed per normal. And then when we cut it off, we are generating the full power again. But if you wanted to carry smaller radiators, it's possible to, and a smaller generator, maybe you don't need a 2 megawatts, you can have the full reactor. You can just throttle the reactor output until you need to turn on the engine. When it's throttled, of course, it's not going to give you much thrust, but then all you need to do is turn it back up again once you light the engine, and then you'll be all right. So that is the idea, and I'm going to release this setup as its own zip so that you can try it out. But this is very limited because it doesn't have additional parts like the different types of reactor and all that business. But at least you can give feedback to tell me if something is going wrong. Because I haven't tested it against other mods, I discovered that it had the problem with the module, the Real Fuels module and solver engines by testing the ISH time warp with other engines. So it was just a practical test because I don't know all of the code in solver engines or anything like that. So there are other mods that I don't know the code of that it might conflict with, and if you guys are running those mods, then you can tell me. So we'll have to see about that. But for now, as far as the mods that I normally use, it seems to be okay, except it presumably has the same problem with Principia that Warp Thrust does, in that Principia is trying to update the orbit of the vessel as well as Warp Thrust or ISH time warp. So they conflict like that because they're trying to update the same thing. So yeah, that is the situation. This is the progress. The next step is to introduce a radiation system, which I've started to work on. And it'll be very simplified because I want people to have a firm grasp of what's going on. But then you'll have a radiation system based on the reactor, as opposed to Kerbalism, which has a radiation system, but that's an ambient radiation system based on the environment. So anyway, that is the idea. That's the progress I've made. It doesn't seem like people are super interested in this sort of thing, but I'm in the middle of it, and I might as well try to get it done. So I'll move on to more interesting things later, I swear. So with that, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do press like. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.